I looked at her profile for a long time that night. Just sat there in my armchair with the lamp on, reading the same words over and over. Then I closed my phone, set it face down on the side table, and went to bed without saying a word to anyone. That was the moment everything changed. But let me take you back to where it actually started. I was 62 when I met her. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I've heard it all since. From my sister, from my mates down at the club, from my own son. But at 62, you stop apologizing for things that make you feel alive again. My wife passed in 2019. Kidney disease, which sounds clinical and tidy when you say it out loud. But the reality of it was 3 years of watching someone you built your whole life with slowly disappear. By the end, I was sleeping in the recliner in the lounge because the hospital bed they'd delivered made her feel like she was already gone, and she wanted to stay in our bedroom as long as possible. After she died, my daughter flew up from Christchurch. My son drove over from Hamilton, and they both stayed for a week and then went back to their lives. Which is as it should be. I didn't resent them for it. But the quiet that settles in after something like that, it's not peaceful quiet. It's the kind that sits on your chest. For 2 years, I just got on with things. Kept the section tidy. Went to bowls on Wednesdays. Cooked enough food for 2 out of habit and threw half of it away. My neighbor's wife, bless her, kept leaving casseroles on the doorstep with little notes that said things like, "Just warm it at 180 for 20 minutes, as if I'd forgotten how to use the oven. I hadn't forgotten. I just didn't see much point in cooking for one. My son was the one who set up the profile for me. He came over one Sunday in autumn, sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, and said, "Dad, you need to at least try." I told him I wasn't interested in swiping through pictures of women like I was flipping through a catalog. He said it wasn't like that anymore. He made me a profile with a photo from my granddaughter's birthday. I'm smiling properly in it, which is rare. And he wrote a little description that made me sound more interesting than I feel most days. Then, he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Just see what happens." What happened was I matched with a woman named Tanya. She was 38. I want to be upfront about that. 24 years between us. I noticed it immediately and thought, well, she's made a mistake with the filters. Or she's after something. Or both. But she messaged first. And her message was about the photo. She said she liked that I was smiling like I meant it. Because most men on there looked like they were at a job interview. I laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud. In my kitchen. Alone. I hadn't done that in longer than I could remember. We talked every evening for 3 weeks before we met in person. She was from Auckland originally. Had moved to Tauranga for work, something in marketing. Digital content. The sort of job that exists now that didn't exist when I was her age. She was funny and direct, and she had opinions about everything, which I liked. Some of those opinions I disagreed with, and she didn't seem to mind at all when I said so. That was refreshing. My late wife had been the same way. Strong-minded women have always suited me better than women who just agree with whatever you say. We had coffee at a place on the waterfront. She was already there when I arrived, which I appreciated nothing worse than walking into a cafe and hovering uncertainly by the door. She stood up when she saw me, shook my hand, and then laughed and said, "That's very formal, let's start again," and gave me a hug instead. I liked her immediately. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other regularly. She lived about 40 minutes away, and she'd often drive over on weekends. I cooked, I make a decent roast, and my pavlova is genuinely good. I'm not being modest, and she'd bring wine, and we'd sit on the deck after dinner and talk until it got cold. She met my neighbor and his wife at the fence one Saturday morning and charmed them completely. She had that quality. She made everyone feel like she was genuinely interested in them. I told her about my late wife fairly early on. It felt important to be honest about that. About how much of my life she'd taken up, how much she still did in some ways. Tanya listened carefully and asked good questions. Not intrusive ones, just the kind that showed she was actually paying attention. She told me a bit about her own past, a long relationship in her late 20s that ended badly. She didn't go into detail, and I didn't push, and a shorter one after that which she described as a lesson I needed to learn. She seemed settled in herself, settled and purposeful in the way some people are in their late 30s when they've figured out who they are. I introduced her to my son about 2 months in. He was polite, which with him means he was reserving judgment. He took me aside afterward and said, "She seems nice, Dad," in the tone people use when they mean something more complicated. My daughter was warmer. She video called from Christchurch one evening when Tanya was at mine, and the two of them ended up chatting for 20 minutes about a television series they both watched. That made me happy in a way I found hard to explain. I didn't follow Tanya on social media. I want to be honest about this. I'm not on Facebook much, and I've never understood Instagram, and I didn't think about it. I didn't ask and she didn't offer. I assumed at some point it would just happen naturally, the way it does when you're building a life alongside someone. She posted regularly, she'd mentioned it, said it was partly for work, that she needed to maintain a presence for her job. I accepted that without really thinking about it. It was my granddaughter who brought it up. She's 16. Sharp as anything, and she was visiting one Sunday with my son and his wife. She was on her phone at the kitchen table while I was making lunch, and she said, without looking up, "Granddad, is your girlfriend Tanya? Her last name Mitchell?" I said yes. Why? She tilted the phone toward me. I put my reading glasses on and leaned over. It was Tanya's Instagram account. Hundreds of posts, beautifully photographed food, sunsets, weekend trips, selfies at cafes, a whole curated version of a life. And underneath the posts, in the bio at the top, it said, "Living my best single life in the Bay, adventure seeker, good food, good wine, good people." I stood very still for a moment. My granddaughter was watching me with that particular teenage caution. She knew something was wrong but wasn't sure how wrong. "Thanks, love," I said, and went back to making lunch. I didn't say anything to Tanya that day. I didn't want to react before I'd had time to actually think. That's one thing age gives you. If you let it the ability to sit with something uncomfortable without immediately reaching for a reaction. When you're young, you think slowness is weakness. You get older, and you realize it's just sense. That night, after my son and his family had gone, I went and sat in the armchair and looked at her account properly. Not snooping, her account was public. Anyone with a phone could see it. I scrolled back months. She'd been posting consistently the whole time we'd been together. Photos from weekends I knew she'd spent with me, the beach walk we'd done in July. There was a photo of that coastline, but I wasn't in any of them. Not once. The captions described her solo adventures, her single girl weekends, her independent life. In August, 2 months into us seeing each other, she'd posted a sunset photo and captioned it, "Just me and the horizon. Some of us are built for this," followed by hashtags about solo travel and independence and, yes, being single. I closed the phone, set it on the table, went to bed. The next time she came over, I waited until we were sitting down with a cup of tea. I didn't want to do it, standing in the doorway like a confrontation, and I said, calmly, "I had a look at your Instagram." She looked up. Something crossed her face that was quick and hard to read. "It's a public account," I said. "Anyone can see it." "I know that," she said. "What about it?" "The bio says you're living your best single life." She put her mug down. "It's a persona," she said. "It's for content. My audience expects a certain image." I nodded slowly. "Right. And the hashtags. Everyone uses hashtags. It's just how the algorithm works, and not having me in any of your photos." She tilted her head slightly. "Some people like to keep their private lives private." "That's fair," I said. "But you posted the coastline from our walk in July." A pause. "That's a location. That's not you." I looked at her for a moment. She looked back. There was something in her expression that I recognized, and not fondly a kind of practiced composure. The look of someone who has talked their way out of corners before and fully expected to do it again. "Tanya," I said. "I'm 62 years old. I've been married. I've sat with my wife while she died. I've raised 2 children. I know the difference between someone keeping their life private and someone keeping their relationship secret. Those are different things." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to post photos of me," I said. "I couldn't care less about that. What I'm asking is why you're presenting yourself to the world as a single woman." "It doesn't affect us," she said. "It affects how I understand the situation," I said. "You're being very rigid about this." There it was. That pivot from answering the question to questioning the person asking it. I'd been with my late wife for 34 years and we'd had our share of difficult conversations. And I knew that move. I knew what it meant. "I don't think I am," I said quietly. She left not long after. Not in a dramatic way. There was no slamming of doors, no raised voices. She just said she needed to think, and she left. And I stood at the kitchen window and watched her car go down the drive. She texted that night. Said she thought I was overreacting, that social media wasn't real life, that I was placing too much importance on something trivial. I read the message, set the phone down, and didn't reply. My daughter rang 2 days later. Tanya had apparently messaged her, which surprised me. I didn't know they'd exchanged numbers. My daughter told me calmly that Tanya had said I'd shut down and was refusing to communicate, and asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I said I hadn't refused anything. I'd said what I needed to say. She'd said what she needed to say. And I was now waiting to see what she did with it. "What do you think she'll do?" my daughter asked. "I think she'll keep doing what she's been doing," I said. "And that'll tell me everything I need to know." I was right. A week passed. She sent a few more messages, one saying she missed me, one saying she hoped I wasn't catastrophizing, one at 11 at night. That was just a string of question marks. I didn't reply to any of them. I wasn't punishing her. I simply had nothing to add. I'd said what I meant. I'd been heard or I hadn't. Either she'd understand it or she wouldn't. She didn't update her Instagram. Still public. Still the same bio. Still no sign that anyone in her life knew she was in a relationship. 11 days after she left, there was a knock at my door. I assumed it was my neighbor. He sometimes comes round on a Saturday morning if he needs a hand with something. But when I opened the door, it was Tanya, and standing next to her was a woman who was clearly her mother. I blinked. "Sorry to just show up," Tanya said. She looked like she hadn't slept well. "This is my mum, Elaine." Her mother gave me a look that was somewhere between apologetic and assessing. She was a small woman. Neat. Maybe late 60s. She said, "I hope you don't mind me coming along." Tanya wanted to talk, and I thought it might help to have someone. I stood aside and let them in. I put the kettle on because I didn't know what else to do. And we sat at the kitchen table, which is where all the important conversations in my life have happened. Tanya talked. She said she'd been wrong to keep the Instagram the way she had. She said she'd been scared. Scared of how people would see her. Scared of what her audience would think. Scared that a serious relationship with someone my age would make her look like she'd given up on something, though she couldn't quite articulate what. She said she knew how that sounded. She said she was sorry. Her mother sat quietly. At one point she said, "I told her months ago she needed to sort this out," in a tone that suggested this had been a longer conversation than I knew about. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. I'm aware that at my age, especially in these situations, there's a temptation to lecture to draw on your years of experience and deliver something wise and final. I've tried to resist that impulse. It's rarely as useful as it feels. When Tanya finished, I said, "I appreciate you coming. I appreciate you saying all of that. I believe you mean it." She looked at me with something like hope. "But here's what I've been thinking about this past week," I said. "You weren't keeping your private life private. You were keeping me out of a public life that you were very actively curating. There's a real difference. And the part that stayed with me, the part I keep coming back to, isn't the Instagram. It's that, when I brought it up, your first instinct was to make it my problem, to suggest I was being rigid, to question my reaction instead of answering my question." She was very still. "I've been thinking about what that means," I said. "And I think it means we want different things, even if neither of us planned it that way." Her mother, to her credit, said nothing. She just looked at her hands. Tanya left that day with her mother, and I haven't seen her since. She texted once more, a long message, and I read it and replied kindly and briefly. And that was the end of it. Her Instagram still says what it says. I wouldn't know, I stopped looking. That was about 8 months ago now. My granddaughter, who started all of this by tilting her phone at me over the kitchen bench, has since decided I'm actually pretty cool, which I'm told is significant praise from a 16-year-old. My son stopped being careful around the subject, which means he's moved past his concern. My daughter, who has always understood me slightly better than anyone, said when we talked about it, "Dad, you handled that exactly right." And I said, "I don't know about that," and she said, "I do. I joined a photography class. Wednesday afternoons at the community center, there are 7 of us, ranging from 60 to 81, and we are collectively terrible at it and having a wonderful time. The tutor is patient beyond all reasonable expectation. Last week, I took a photo of the harbor at sunset that I was genuinely pleased with. I didn't post it anywhere. I just looked at it for a while and thought, that's a good photo, and went and made my dinner. People ask me sometimes, usually younger people, whether I regret getting involved with someone so much younger, whether I feel foolish. I tell them honestly, no, I don't. I'm glad I tried. I'm glad I didn't let grief make me afraid of living, and I'm glad that, at 62, I still knew the difference between someone loving me and someone fitting me into a version of their life where I was convenient but invisible. That last part matters. It matters at any age, but when you're older, when you've already lost the person you thought you'd spend everything with, you become very clear about what you will and won't accept. Not bitter, clear, just clear, like water that's had time to settle. The thing I'd want anyone to take from this, whether you're 35 or 65, is that the words people say are one thing, and the shape of the life they're actually living is another. Pay attention to the shape, not to be suspicious, not to go looking for problems that aren't there, but because the shape tells you the truth that the words sometimes can't or won't. If someone loves you, you won't need to argue your way into existing in their life. You'll just be there, naturally, without negotiation. And if you find yourself making a case for your own presence, if you find yourself explaining why it's reasonable to be acknowledged, that's information. Take it seriously. It took me 62 years and a granddaughter with a phone to remember that. But the lesson was worth it. The harbor's beautiful in the mornings here. I know that now in a way I didn't before all this, because I've started going for walks again, early, before the day gets busy. There's a bench at the end of the esplanade where I sometimes sit for half an hour with a flask of tea and just watch the water. I haven't told anyone what I think about when I sit there, but I'm at peace with it. That's enough. I've thought a lot about what this whole thing actually taught me. Not in a grand, sweeping way. I'm too old for grand and sweeping. Just quietly, over morning walks and cups of tea on the deck, turning it over. What I keep coming back to is this. The way things end usually has a lot to do with how they began. When I first saw Tanya's profile and thought, she's probably made a mistake with the filters, I brushed it off. When she charmed everyone around her immediately, I took it at face value. When she never once suggested following each other online, I filled in the gap with a generous explanation. She's private. She's focused on work. It'll happen naturally. I wasn't foolish. I was just choosing, at every small moment, not to look too closely. That's not the same as being deceived. That's a choice you make, and it has consequences. The consequences, in this case, were that I spent months building something real while she was building a version of herself for public consumption that I had no place in. Not because she was a bad person, I don't think she was, but because she hadn't decided yet what she actually wanted. And it was easier to keep both options open than to commit to one. That kind of in-between living always costs someone. In this case, it cost us both something. The moment that stays with me isn't the Instagram bio, it's the pivot. When I asked her a straightforward question, she turned it around and made my asking the problem. That's not a social media habit. That's a character pattern, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Treatware, real wisdom, the kind that comes from paying attention over a long life, is knowing the difference between a misunderstanding and a pattern. Misunderstandings get resolved when you name them. Patterns just find a new shape. I didn't feel righteous walking away from that relationship. I felt sad mostly, a little tired, but also clear. In the way you can only feel clear when you've stopped pretending something is something it isn't. That clarity was worth something. It still is. The near-lurk, the steadiness, the willingness to hold your position without making it a war, that's the part I'm most at peace with. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't send long messages at midnight. I said what I meant. I heard what she said. And when it became apparent we were not on the same page about something fundamental, I let it end with dignity. That's not coldness. That's respect for her and for myself. I think about my late wife sometimes in this context. She always said the most loving thing you can do for another person is be honest with them, even when it costs you something. She was right about that. Honesty in a relationship isn't just about not lying. It's about not letting someone invest in a version of things that isn't true. What Tanya was doing, keeping her public life sealed off, presenting herself as available and unattached, wasn't just about Instagram. It was a kind of dishonesty, even if she hadn't fully named it to herself. If there's one thing I'd say to anyone watching this, whether you're 62 like me or 32, it's that your presence in someone's life should not require negotiation. You shouldn't have to make a case for why it's reasonable to exist in the life of someone who says they care about you. The moment you find yourself explaining why acknowledgement is fair, something is already wrong. That's not rigidity. That's just knowing your own worth. It took me a long time, and a fair bit of grief, and a granddaughter with a sharp eye and a phone, to remember that. The harbor is still beautiful in the mornings. I'm still going for those walks. Some lessons arrive late, but they arrive, and they stay.